Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday, and Elena Martinez found herself staring at the elegant script longer than necessary. After 25 years of friendship, she was finally going to see her best friend from college married to the love of her life. What she hadn't expected was the handwritten note at the bottom in familiar handwriting. Looking forward to seeing you again, Elena. It's been too long. Daniel. Her best friend's son, who had been just a lanky teenager when she'd last seen him 5 years ago. Now, according to the invitation, he was his mother's best man. Elena set the invitation on her kitchen counter and tried to ignore the flutter in her chest. At 38, she was long past the age where she should be feeling butterflies about anyone, especially someone who had grown up calling her Aunt Elena. But something about that handwritten note, the careful way he'd written her name, made her wonder if the shy, thoughtful boy she remembered had grown into someone entirely different. 2 weeks later, Elena found herself in the lobby of the Grand Majestic Hotel, her hands smoothing down the emerald silk dress she'd chosen after trying on half her wardrobe. The lobby was bustling with wedding guests, but it was the deep, unfamiliar voice behind her that made her freeze. Elena? She turned, and whatever breath she'd been holding escaped in a rush. The lanky teenager was gone, replaced by a man who stood 6 feet tall with the kind of confident posture that suggested he'd grown comfortable in his own skin. His dark hair was styled in a way that looked effortlessly perfect, and his eyes, those same warm brown eyes she remembered, held something new, something that made her heart skip in a way it hadn't in years. Daniel, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. You've grown up. He smiled, and she noticed the way it reached his eyes, creating small lines at the corners. That hadn't been there before. I was hoping you'd say that instead of you've gotten so tall, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made her want to keep him talking. I was getting tired of being treated like I was still 16. Well, you're definitely not 16 anymore, Elena said, immediately regretting how breathless she sounded. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. Your mother is going to be so happy you're here for her wedding. Something flickered in his expression, a brief shadow that passed so quickly she might have imagined it. She is, he agreed. Though I have to admit, I was more looking forward to seeing you again. When I saw you on the guest list, I may have specifically requested to be the one to walk you down the aisle as an escort. Elena felt her cheeks warm. You did? I did, he said, stepping closer. I hope that's okay. I remembered you always being so kind to me when I was younger, and I wanted to make sure I had a chance to properly thank you. The way he said, properly, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the hotel's air conditioning. She was acutely aware of how close he was standing, how she could smell his cologne, something sophisticated and spicy that definitely belonged to a man, not a boy. Of course it's okay, she said, then immediately worried she'd sounded too eager. I'm honored. Before he could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the lobby. Elena, you made it. They both turned to see Sarah Martinez, soon to be Sarah Thompson, rushing toward them, her arms open wide. Elena found herself swept into a hug that lasted long enough for her to compose herself, though she was acutely aware of Daniel's presence behind her. You look absolutely radiant, Elena said, meaning it. Sarah was glowing in a way that only brides-to-be could manage, her smile bright enough to light up the entire lobby. Thank you, Sarah said, then turned to her son. I see you've already found Elena. I hope you're not monopolizing her time. I was just about to offer to show her to her room, Daniel said. And Elena caught the slight defensiveness in his tone. If she'd like. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, and Elena caught a look passing between mother and son that she couldn't quite interpret. That's very thoughtful of you, Sarah said finally. But I was actually hoping Elena and I could catch up over coffee. It's been too long since we've had a proper conversation. Elena nodded, perhaps too quickly. Of course, I'd love that. As they walked toward the hotel's cafe, Elena found herself glancing back at Daniel. He was still standing where they'd left him, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, he gave her a small smile that made her stomach flip in a way that was definitely inappropriate for a woman her age. Looking at her best friend's son, the next 2 hours passed in a blur of wedding planning updates and catching up on 25 years of friendship. But underneath the comfortable conversation with Sarah, Elena found herself distracted by thoughts of Daniel. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd said properly with such deliberate intention, the way he'd seemed genuinely happy to see her again. It was only when Sarah excused herself to check on final wedding preparations that Elena realized she was in trouble. Whatever she'd been feeling was more than just surprise at seeing how much he'd grown up. It was attraction, pure and simple, and it was the kind of attraction that had the potential to complicate everything. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the sound of someone sitting down across from her. Looking up, she found Daniel sliding into the chair Sarah had just vacated, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. Peace offering, he said, setting 1 cup in front of her. I thought you might need caffeine after listening to my mother's wedding planning stories. Elena couldn't help but smile. How did you know I take it black? I pay attention to details, he said, and there was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. I always have. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Elena found herself studying him over the rim of her coffee cup. There was a maturity to him that went beyond just physical changes. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from someone who knew who he was and was comfortable with it. So, she said, setting down her cup, what do you do now? Last I heard, you were still in college. I graduated 3 years ago, he said. I'm an architect now. Commercial buildings mostly. But I've been working on some residential projects lately. I actually designed a house last year that was featured in Metropolitan Home. That's incredible, Elena said, genuinely impressed. You always were artistic as a kid. I remember you sketching constantly. You remember that? He asked. And there was something almost vulnerable in his voice. Of course I remember, she said softly. I remember a lot of things about you. The air between them seemed to shift, becoming charged with something Elena couldn't quite name, but knew she should probably be wary of. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes serious. Elena, he said, I know this might sound strange, but I've thought about seeing you again for a long time. More than I probably should have. She felt her breath catch. Daniel ... I know, he said quickly. I know it's complicated. I know you probably still see me as that awkward teenager who used to follow you around when you visited. But I'm not that person anymore. And I needed you to know that. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, and exactly what she'd been hoping for since the moment she'd seen him again. You're my best friend's son, she said quietly. I know, he said. But I'm also a grown man who's attracted to an intelligent, beautiful woman. Those 2 things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Before Elena could respond, before she could sort through the maze of emotions his words had unleashed, Sarah's voice cut through the moment. There you are, she said, appearing at their table with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've been looking everywhere for you. The rehearsal dinner is in an hour, and I need all hands on deck. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the spell broken. Of course, Mom. Just let me finish my coffee. Actually, Sarah said, her tone carefully neutral, I was hoping Elena could help me with something. If you don't mind. Elena could feel the tension in the air. The way Sarah's smile was just a little too bright. The way Daniel's jaw had tightened slightly. She stood up, trying to ignore the way her legs felt unsteady. I'd be happy to help, she said, then turned to Daniel. Thank you for the coffee. Anytime, he said, and the way he said it made it sound like a promise. As Elena followed Sarah toward the elevator, she could feel Daniel watching her go. When the elevator doors closed, Sarah turned to her with an expression that was part concerned, part curious. He's not a little boy anymore, Sarah said quietly. No, Elena agreed, not trusting herself to say more. He's also not someone who gets infatuated easily, Sarah continued. When he was 22, he dated the same girl for 3 years. Very serious, very focused. When he decides he wants something, he pursues it with the same intensity he brings to everything else. Elena stared at the elevator buttons. Sarah, I would never. I know, Sarah said quickly. I know you wouldn't do anything to hurt either of us. But Elena, I see the way he looks at you. And I see the way you look at him. I just want you to be careful. The elevator stopped at the 4th floor and Sarah's expression softened. I also want you to know that if you were anyone else, I'd be worried. But you're not anyone else. You're Elena. And if my son is going to be interested in someone, I can't think of anyone I'd trust more. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm not sure that makes this any easier. No, Sarah agreed. I don't suppose it does. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of introductions and small talk, but Elena found herself hyper-aware of Daniel's presence throughout the evening. He was charming and funny with the other guests, the perfect son doing his duty as best man. But whenever she caught his eye across the room, she saw the same intensity that had been there during their conversation in the cafe. It was only when the evening was winding down that he approached her again, this time with a glass of wine in each hand. Dance with me, he said, nodding toward the small dance floor where a few couples were swaying to the string quartet. Elena hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. One dance, he said. We're at a wedding party. People are supposed to dance. Before she could protest further, he'd taken her hand and led her onto the dance floor. The song was slow and romantic, and when he pulled her into his arms, Elena felt like she was in dangerous territory. You're a good son, she said, trying to keep the conversation safe. I'm trying to be, he said, his voice low. But I'm also trying to be honest about what I want. Daniel, I know you feel it too, he said, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. I can see it in the way you look at me. You're not looking at me like I'm a kid anymore. Elena closed her eyes, letting herself enjoy the feeling of being in his arms for just a moment. This is complicated. It doesn't have to be, he said. After the wedding, I'm going back to Chicago. You're going back to your life. We don't have to make this more complicated than it needs to be. She opened her eyes and looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes things happen that are unexpected. Sometimes people connect in ways that don't follow the rules. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get one perfect moment that you can carry with you for the rest of your life. The song ended, but neither of them moved. They stood there in the middle of the dance floor, looking at each other like they were the only two people in the room. One perfect moment, Elena repeated. One perfect moment, Daniel confirmed. And as the next song began, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Room 312, she said quietly. 1 hour. The next hour passed like a dream. Elena found herself in her hotel room, pacing between the window and the bathroom mirror, changing her mind every few minutes. This was insane. This was a mistake. This was the kind of thing that could ruin a friendship that had lasted 25 years, but it was also the kind of thing that might be worth the risk. When the knock came at her door, she was ready. She opened it to find Daniel standing in the hallway, still in his dress shirt and tie, looking as uncertain as she felt. "I wasn't sure you'd actually," he began. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. He entered the room and immediately went to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "I keep thinking this is a mistake," he said. "Maybe it is," Elena said, closing the door behind him. "But maybe some mistakes are worth making." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Elena, I need you to know that whatever happens tonight, this isn't just about tonight for me. I've been thinking about you for years. Since I was in college, since I became old enough to understand what I was feeling." "What were you feeling?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you were the first woman who made me understand what love was supposed to feel like," he said, moving closer to her. "That you were the standard by which I've measured everyone else. That I've been waiting for someone like you for so long. That I'd started to think maybe I was chasing something impossible." Elena felt her resolve crumbling. "I'm not perfect, Daniel. I'm not the person you think I am." "You're exactly the person I think you are," he said, reaching up to touch her face. "You're kind and intelligent and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man than I am." When he kissed her, it was with the kind of gentle intensity that made her forget every reason why this was a bad idea. He kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, like she was precious and fragile and worth every risk. When they finally broke apart, Elena was breathing hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It changes everything," Daniel said, his forehead resting against hers. "And we both know it." They talked until dawn, sitting on her bed with the city lights twinkling below them. They talked about his childhood, about her divorce 3 years earlier, about the way she'd always seen him as Sarah's sweet son, who was going to grow up to be someone special. They talked about the way he'd always seen her as the sophisticated, glamorous woman who treated him like he was worth listening to. "I had such a crush on you when I was 16, he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on her hand. "I used to practice conversations with you in my head. I'd imagine being old enough to ask you out, sophisticated enough to impress you." "I had no idea," Elena said, though she was starting to remember moments from that time that now seemed loaded with significance. "I was very good at hiding it," he said. "I was terrified you'd think I was just a silly kid." "You were never a silly kid," she said softly. "You were always thoughtful and kind and more mature than you should have been." "I was in love with you," he said simply. "I just didn't know how to tell you." Elena looked at him, at this beautiful, complicated man who had somehow grown from the sweet boy she'd known into someone who could make her feel things she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "But I know I can't pretend this didn't happen. I can't go back to being just your best friend's son who you see at family gatherings." Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. They both froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. "Elena?" Sarah's voice came through the door. "Are you awake? I know it's early, but I was hoping we could have breakfast before the wedding preparations start." Daniel closed his eyes and Elena could see the conflict written across his face. Without thinking, she squeezed his hand. "I'll be right there," she called out, then turned to Daniel. The window leads to a fire escape, she whispered. You can slip out that way. Elena, we'll figure this out, she said. But not right now. Not like this. He nodded, kissing her forehead softly before moving toward the window. Just before he climbed out, he turned back to her. This isn't over, he said. I know, she replied as Elena watched him disappear down the fire escape. She was struck by the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, felt something that couldn't be unfelt. And as she prepared to face Sarah, she knew that one perfect moment had become something much more complicated than either of them had imagined. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant, her new husband looked besotted, and everything went according to plan. But Elena found herself distracted throughout the ceremony, hyper-aware of Daniel's presence as he stood beside his mother, hyper-aware of the way he looked at her during the ceremony, hyper-aware of the way her heart jumped every time their eyes met. During the reception, they danced again, but this time it was different. This time, everyone could see the way they looked at each other, the way Daniel's hand lingered on her waist, the way Elena's eyes never left his face, the way they moved together like they'd been dancing together for years. It was Sarah who finally approached them, her wedding dress rustling as she tapped Daniel on the shoulder. May I cut in? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Daniel stepped back, his jaw tight. Of course, it's your wedding. As Sarah moved into Elena's arms, Elena prepared herself for the worst. But instead of anger or disappointment, she saw something else in her friend's eyes. Something that looked almost like understanding. You love him, Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question, and Elena saw no point in denying it. I think I do. And he loves you, Sarah continued. It's written all over his face. It's been written all over his face since he was 16 years old, but I was too blind to see it. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I know, Sarah said. And maybe that's why it's okay. Because you didn't pursue him. You didn't try to make this happen. It just happened. They swayed to the music in silence for a moment, and Elena found herself holding her breath. He's a good man, Sarah said. Finally. Better than his father ever was. And if he's going to love someone, I can't think of anyone I'd rather it be than you. Elena stared at her friend, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. You're giving us your blessing. I'm giving you my blessing to figure out if what you have is real, Sarah said. I'm giving you my blessing to be happy, both of you. As the song ended, Sarah stepped back and smiled at Elena. Just don't hurt him, she said. And don't let him hurt you. You're both too important to me for that. Later that evening, as the reception began to wind down, Elena found herself on the hotel balcony, looking out at the city lights. She was still in her bridesmaid dress, but she'd kicked off her heels and was enjoying the cool night air. Beautiful view, Daniel said, joining her at the railing. It is, she agreed, not looking at him. Your mother spoke to me. I know, he said. She spoke to me too. She said some things that I never expected to hear. What did she say? She said that love doesn't always follow the rules. That sometimes the best things in life are the ones that surprise you. He turned to face her, leaning against the railing. She also said that you're the kind of woman who makes a man want to be better than he is. And that if I let you get away, I'm an idiot. Elena finally looked at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. And what do you think? I think I'm tired of pretending this is just one perfect moment, he said. I think I'm tired of pretending that I don't want more than one night with you. I think I'm tired of pretending that I haven't been in love with you for most of my adult life. Elena felt her heart skip. Daniel, I know it's complicated, he said. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea. But I also know that I'd rather have one day with you than a lifetime of wondering what if. She studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the hope, the fear. What are you asking me? I'm asking you to give us a chance, he said. I'm asking you to come to Chicago with me. I'm asking you to let me take you to dinner and to the movies and to meet my friends. I'm asking you to let me prove to you that this isn't just about a fantasy or a childhood crush. I'm asking you to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is simple, he said, moving closer to her. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. As he reached up to wipe away her tears, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She leaned into his touch, let herself believe that sometimes the most unlikely love stories were the ones most worth telling. Okay, she said softly. Okay, she repeated, smiling through her tears. Let's see what happens. When Daniel kissed her this time, it was with the kind of joy that made her believe in happy endings. As they stood there on the balcony, with the city lights twinkling below them and the future stretching out before them, Elena realized that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that began with 5 simple words. He was just a friend's son. Until one night changed everything.